So now everybody's gotten signed in and sat down. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. My name is Jason Mangold. I am the county agent here in Compost County for Ag and Natural Resources. I work out of New Braunfels. And so one of the things that I started was what we call our small landowner or new landowner, new homeowner program. And it's the one I'm trying to do something every month throughout the year. On the second Wednesday, next month it'll be the first Wednesday because of scheduling. But it's something that I'm trying to get started, talk a little bit about everything that you might need if you were a new landowner in the county or anything like that, because we do have a lot of people moving in. But being that we are now in January, number one question I always get around this time of year is, how do I get ready for spring gardens? When do I get ready for spring gardens? What can I plant? All that, because typically fall, it's always about trees. I get a lot of questions about trees. So the subject for this one is spring gardening, because if you're going to do a spring garden, February, March is going to be your time to plant, depending on what you want to plant. So we're going to talk a little bit about raised bed gardening, how to build a simple raised bed garden, soil and time to plant, and then obviously what to plant. So the first thing you need to do is you need to have a good site selection. It needs to have 6 to 8 hours of light, water source, ease of access. It needs to be well drained. Fencing, if you have a problem with deer, which we live in the hill country, so everybody has a problem with deer at some point or time. But there's different options. You can garden in a container. You can build raised beds. If you're one of the 5% that actually has soil that you can actually dig down in, you can also do that. I know as a kid, I always did a garden with my grandpa. That was kind of our hobby together. Our garden was probably about 1/2 acre, and so we actually plowed it, and it made it a whole lot easier than trying to dig it by hand. We'd bring the tractor in, plow up rows, and then that was good. Not everybody can do that. Some places you dig 3 inches and you're going to hit solid rock. Some you can go 3 feet before you hit anything. So it just kind of depends on what you got at your place and what you're wanting to do. But equipment, obviously, you got to have the basics. You need some kind of shovel or tiller, water hose, you need soil, buckets, anything like that are going to be basic needs of what you're going to need. If you are having back problems like I always do now, it seems like as I get older, my back keeps going out more and more. You may need something to kneel on or something easier to bend over and work the garden with. Going into that, one of the things I like to do is I like raised beds because I can make the garden taller since I'm a taller person myself. I have a father-in-law who made his a little shorter because he's shorter than me. But the thing you got to remember is when you build a raised bed, and it can be built out of multiple things, remember that some plants get kind of tall. So if you can't reach the top of it because it grows too much, you may need to make it shorter. But reasons for raised garden beds, obviously you lack of soil. That's our biggest thing here in the hill country. We have a lot of rock. A lot of people grow rocks in their backyard, it seems like. I know my lawnmower finds a new rock every time I mow, and I don't know where they keep coming from. But you need to improve, it's a need to improve soil. You're not spending long periods on the ground. It helps to control weeds at some point. It can also make the landscaping blend in, and it controls drainage problems. So what can you build it out of? Lumber, there's timbers, landscape timbers that they sell at Lowe's, Home Depots, concrete blocks, stacked rocks, railroad ties, metal bins. Just depends on how fancy you want to get, how much money you want to spend. I know me personally, I use railroad ties. They were easier, a little bit heavier, but a whole lot easier than stacking a bunch of concrete blocks or trying to build something myself. Yes. For the most part, you can buy them at McCoy's, places like that. Honestly, if you drive to Uvalde, that area, you can probably find about 150 of them on the side of the road. if you're willing to stop and pick them up. But yeah, McCoy's or any of the home improvement places should have them.
So what they're treated with doesn't affect your garden if you keep it away from it. You just use it to build. the
Use it
structure,
to
right?
build it. And most of the time, the ones that they're selling are the ones that have been used already, and they're just selling the leftovers as they're replacing the railroad ties on the train track. So most of that has dissipated anyways, but yes.
Well, because, and I only bring that up because we have a sawmill and we saw down, old telephone poles.
Mhm.
And they're treated similarly.
Yes.
So it makes them perfect ranch
Yes.
material because it's already insect treated, outdoor treated.
Yep, it's outdoor treated, and by the time you get them, they've been used, so a lot of it has dissipated as far as the chemicals on the outside. And it works very, very well because they don't really break down a whole lot. So what do you need to consider when designing your bed? What are we planning to grow? Some plants need deeper soil for bigger root systems. What kind of grass do you have? No matter what you do, depending on the grass, you will always get some kind of grass in your vegetable garden. Just depends on what you got. And then as far as weed eating, things like that as well. And then what does the rest of my landscape look like? Wildlife problems, things like that. Do you want it to kind of blend into your backyard or your house if you have a really nice landscape done already? Or is it something that it's going to be 30, 40 yards away from the house and you're not even going to worry about it? So here's a few examples of raised beds. Obviously, you can do build your own, like I said. Some of them are simple. There's the timbers we were talking about. Concrete blocks. I know that's what my father-in-law did, and it's really nice. He did 2 big ones in his backyard. There's also these, but then again, like I was telling y'all before, if you're going to build them real tall, remember, if you're going to plant tomatoes or something like that, they do get really tall. And so eventually, if you get too tall, you're not going to be able to reach your fruit without some kind of ladder. And who wants to get a ladder for the garden? So big question is, how big should your garden be? If space isn't an issue, time is the deciding factor. So a 30 by 30 foot garden typically can feed 4 people. It's going to need, you're going to take 6 hours of planting and 4 to 6 hours weekly of tilling, planting, weeding, harvesting. So that's how much time you're going to do. So do you have about 8 hours to set up a garden and 4.5 to 6 hours a week to work it? If not, I would make it smaller. But that's something to think about on size wise. If you haven't started one, or if you already have one, a garden that you're wanting to maybe upkeep and try to change things a little bit, how much time a week do you have to put towards that garden? Because that's going to determine how much you're actually going to grow, what you're going to grow, things like that. So if you don't have a garden, and who does have a garden already, and who's thinking about building one or has? Okay. So planning a garden, there's a few apps that I've found that work real well, and it lets you kind of pick out an idea of, well, maybe I want it 20 foot by 4 foot. So a real long rectangle. Well, these apps will actually let you go in and kind of figure out, well, if I put cucumbers here or squash here, corn here, tomatoes, peppers, whatever you want, you can actually get an idea for your garden in those apps and design it yourself.
Let me just mention something about what we thought. I used railroad timbers, and I didn't see them anywhere. So one of these places that's since moved that has stuff on the side of the road, you know, rock and soil and all that. I went in there, I asked him about it. He said, how many you need? He ordered them for me. Meanwhile, he had nothing on display. But I was able to order them from him. And like I said, I ordered 16 of them and they've been there for years now and they work fine. So I just thought, because you may not see them, but they are in access to get them.
Yes.
Yeah,
You can always order them. And I think there's actually, I can't remember what the street is. I think it's not San Antonio, but maybe Atlanta. There's a company that's actually a landscape company, and they always have timber railroad ties stacked up that they sell as well. I don't know what the company's called, but I see them every time I go to Guadalupe Brewing down there. All right, so what do I plant? Choose a plant that will get eaten. Remove plants that won't grow. If spacing is limiting, remove veggies. Cheap to buy, ones that take up a lot of space. So unless you have trellises, obviously cucumbers, things like that, take up a lot of room. It's because they're going to space out, but if you have a trellis, obviously you can get it to grow up instead of out. So space is limiting. Remember that some veggies do grow bigger. So if you're wanting to get an abundance of stuff that you can grow and use, and you only have a little bit of space, be mindful of what you're actually planting. On your list, you should have favorite veggies that are inexpensive, rare, or taste better if you grow them yourself. Record how much space plants need to grow in between rows. And then start with ideal number of plants by calculating how much you eat, family eats by the seed bag, multiply the space need and compare the size of the garden, and then you're going to fit it accordingly. So an example would be intensive gardening versus row gardening. So in the past, the ones that have gardens and have done some gardening, do y'all do more of a row gardening or do y'all do intensive? Do y'all know the difference?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Intensive gardening versus row gardening. Because that's one thing we're going to talk about. I just wanted to see if anybody. So intensive gardening is where you're going to stack as much as you possibly can in that garden and use every square inch. Where row gardening sounds just like you would think. You have, say, peppers, then there's a little space in between, and then you got your tomatoes, a space in between, onions, space in between. You're not going to have that with intense gardening. And so there's a difference. Intense gardening, family size, this is an example. 2 adults, bed size is 20 foot by 2 foot across. They want to grow tomatoes, green beans, and corn. So they're going to put 60 green beans, 40 corn plants, and then tomatoes, they didn't get it in there. But as you can see, everything is as close as possible in here. And I'll show you a picture here in a second. But there's going to be a difference where spacing, row crops, you're going to have small plants, medium plants, large plants. Small plants, typically you want 14 to 24 inches in between. And that could be your peppers, things like that. Medium plants could be bush beans, squash, things like that. You're going to want 36 inches in between. And then your larger plants, which are summer squash, zucchinis, anything that has a vine, you're going to want 3 to 5 feet in between. And so here's a comparison. So row crop, obviously you can see the rows, right? Intensive, there's not a whole lot of room. So this one, you obviously get a whole lot more, but it's a lot more work. Row crops, they have better air circulation. There are more resources available for plants, less competition. You can use a machine tiller in between the rows so you can get all the weeds out. It's easier to set up in bigger gardens. Intensive is more efficient use of space, but it takes more water and fertilizer. There's more work to set it up. You can only weed out everything by hand. So there's no machine, nothing like that. It does have less weeds, but the weeds you do get obviously are more of a pain to get out. But it's good for raised beds. So me personally, I always do row just because I'm lazy and I want to use a tiller in between when I'm trying to do all the weeding. But I have seen intensive on a full scale. When I was a county agent in Hayes County, I went to a site visit. This lady didn't know what I was getting myself into, to be honest. But she called me out to come look at her garden. I did not realize her garden went from the sidewalk in the front of the house to the very back of her house. Every square inch of that lady's lot was covered in some kind of vegetable or fruit or tree. Every square inch. I don't know how many hours she probably spent in that yard, but I know it was a bunch. But that was my first real look at intensive gardening, and it can be done. You do produce a lot. I want to say she produced 20,000 tons of food out of that garden per year because she does summer or spring and fall gardening. And so she actually sells a bunch, and what she doesn't sell, she donates. But there is definitely a big difference. So depending on your space limit, if you don't have a big amount of space, you might consider intensive gardening. And that's just, we're going to put a lot of different plants in one little area. So soil preparation is another aspect that you need to remember. Tilling, obviously it's quicker, machine till, or you can use hand tools. You till when it's slightly moist. You're gonna till about 8 to 10 inches in the ground if you can. Otherwise, obviously most of us have raised beds. And so you're still gonna wanna at least 8 to 10 inches, but it's gonna be a lot easier. So there is a no-till method. It is better for the soil. Basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna take and let it grow over. So if you just did a spring garden, you let all the weeds come out, let them go during the winter, come back about right now, knock them all down, till it back up and let that decompose. So it's natural nutrition going back in there. There's no setup time for till garden. You're just gonna mow it, lots of mulch on top of it if you want, mix it in. But those are your two options as far as soil preparation goes.
Excuse me, what are rhizomatous weeds?
Just those are your common weeds that you get.
Johnson grass?
So soil in the area, typically it's a little higher in pH because obviously we have nothing but limestone underneath us and rocks. Deeper soil equals happier plants. So when deciding on the deal, make sure if you're going to build a garden that you still have that 8 to 10 inches of soil. Typically, I think mine are about 2 foot, the ones that I have. So you can go anywhere in between that. You can add organic matter, can help soil looser. One thing I do want to remind everybody is when we're looking at soil, obviously we want it to be able to drain, but we don't want it to drain too fast. What happens a lot of times is if you go east of 35, you get into the black soil that holds its water really, really well. Or you come over here where it's basically granites, things like that, and it just drains super fast. So you kind of want a mixture. So if you have soil that's real sandy, things like that, maybe get some clay. If you have strictly clay, black soil on the east side of the county, then you might want to add a little bit of sand because you don't want those roots sitting in water. That's the biggest issue I find when I go out to people's places is I'm having an issue with my garden. Everything's dying. What's going on? You go out there and it's just completely wet, sopping wet. It's not really draining, and that's the issue. Mounding versus flat rows. That's another one that people either one or the other. It's always about 50-50 is what I find. So you can either make mounds like this, where you run the water down the channel, things like, and the root systems can get the water there, or it's nice and flat like this. It just kind of depends on the way that your irrigation is set up. As a kid, we did mounds, and the only reason we did that is we'd set the water hose at the very end, let the water run all the way down. Once it filled up the whole pocket, we moved to the next. And what that did is it soaked into the mound, so the roots got the water, but it still was able to drain because those were a little higher. And so it wasn't actually setting in there, kind of like doing a raised bed, for instance. You can control the water moisture a lot better in a mound. So mounds promote drainage, may dry out quicker if not wide enough, but you need to increase the depth of soil. That's a good way to do it as well. Containers, using potting soil, not pasture or garden soil, is going to be your big difference. Potting soil also holds the water, but it lets it drain at the same time. It's all about the drainage, things like that. So if you don't have a lot of soil, I would use mounds. If say your soil drains quickly already, there's not really a necessary need for that, so you could do flat. All depends on what you want to do and what you have. Maybe not. You're right. Why are you working now?
Can you ballpark what the percentage would be? Because when I came here, the soil I had delivered was not garden soil, so I had to amend it with sand. But can you give me a ballpark percentage of sand or? Because I don't like it to stay in a ball when I come up
Right.
with my hand. Yeah. Just ballpark.
Say if you had going on, well, let's just say, because everybody's soil is a little different. If you had enough soil that when you clump it up, that it just stays like that, meaning you have real black soil, real clay based soil, I'd probably add 25%. I probably wouldn't go more than that.
That's, yeah.
So depending on what you got, obviously the less clay you have in that soil, the less you're gonna add as far as sand, things like that. But 25% would probably be the most.
And you till it about what, 8 inches?
8 to 10, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
There we go. Why isn't this working? Okay, let's see if this works now. Fertilizing. So question I get a lot is, what kind of fertilizer do I use? But to answer that question, I need to know what's in your soil. How much phosphorus, how much nitrogen, how much of those different compounds do you have in your soil? Because that's going to depend on the fertilizer you use. Unless using manure, compost, or anything like that, other slowly release fertilizers, you don't really want to till it in. Side dress applications later on in the year if you need it, but you avoid using uses of complete fertilizer or fertilizer with phosphorus and calcium unless it's a raised bed. And like I said, when it comes to figuring out your fertilizer, if you are buying what they would call a general fertilizer, and let's say it was a 12-12-12, just for number's sakes. If you already had a lot of phosphorus and now you're adding a whole bunch more phosphorus into your garden, well, you're going to take the chance of ruining your plants. They're probably going to end up turning brown or yellow or something along those lines, and you're not going to be able to produce. So if you want to fertilize, the best thing you can do to start off is go ahead and just get a soil test. We do have soil tests at the extension office. It's a little bag you'd pick up, costs about $12. You send it off to College Station, and they will send you an email with everything that's in that soil. So you absolutely know, okay, we're low in nitrogen or we're low in phosphorus. We need to get something that's a little more into this. But as far as fertilizer goes, that's my best suggestion to y'all, is to find out what's in your soil before you put anything in your soil.
So you're not supposed to till in manure? Or is that just a slow release fertilizer?
That's kind of a slow release fertilizer. Manure is actually.
Oh, okay.
If you're doing it before the season, before you even plant, yes. If you're wanting to till it during while you're growing crops, just throw it on top and let it kind of work its way in there. Kind of like a slow release fertilizer is basically the same
Thank
thing.
you.
So how should you plant? Transplant or seeds? Tomatoes, cucumbers, melons, pumpkins, peppers, corn, eggplants, broccoli, cauliflower. Typically, those are going to be the ones that you would do a transplant on, meaning you're going to go to some location, whether it's a Lowe's, Home Depot, the Haas House down here, plant store, and you're going to buy a transplant, something that's already been grown, and keep it going. Or you're going to do it yourself, which means at the end of the day, you're going to buy seeds. Seeds, I mean, radishes, snap peas, carrots, turnips, lettuce, leafy greens, corn, anything except for potatoes and sweet potatoes. Those absolutely you can start with seeds. Then they're not hard. But in your normal everyday garden, those are kind of how I broke it up on what you'd want to transplant and what you'd actually plant by seed. And that's just going off of everything I've seen as a county agent, on people calling me out to their gardens and things like that. Because I do get a lot of people that call me and say, well, I planted the seed, but nothing happened. And so these are kind of the common ones that I've been called out on, at least the ones I've seen. And that may not be your case. That's just what I've seen as a collection. So planting depths, that's another one that people commonly mistake with seeds, is they will come in there, dig a big old hole, drop that seed at the very bottom, cover it back up. That's not the case. Small seeds, we're gonna lightly press into the soil. Larger seeds, we're gonna cover with about 2 times that diameter. So more likely, you'll never go more than 4 centimeters down into the ground with a seed. And what I see a lot of people do is they take their whole hand, scoop a big old scoop out, drop that seed down and cover it up. Well, that thing's about this deep now. And then they'll call me and say, well, it's been 2 weeks, nothing's happened. Well, that seed's got to come way up before it comes out. And so that's one thing I always try to tell people is you're not actually planting them that far. But that's a good one to cover and one that typically most people don't realize when they're actually planting. Weeds, we all have them. We all have to deal with them. Weeds are a common problem. Many of the things you can do is you can till them, pull them. If you want, you can eat some of them. Burn them, mulch them. There's even solarize them. You can mow them, spray them, or outcompete them. Easiest thing to do, obviously, is till or pull them. If you're first starting off, sometimes I like to burn them because I like to use my pear burner for fun every once in a while. But there's a lot of different options. One thing you can do is at the very beginning of the season, if you have a lot of weeds, you can actually buy a black tarp, cover it up. It keeps it nice and hot, and that will actually kill every single weed in there. And then you can just till it back under if you want. And that's what solarizing is talking about right there. So another issue that a lot of times we find is irrigation. I've seen everything from obviously the drip irrigation. A lot of people like drip irrigations in their garden. I will be honest, I hate it. It's a pain in the butt. They break real easy. And when you got an issue and they're broken, you got to pull the whole darn thing up. And I absolutely hate drip irrigation in yards, gardens, anything like that. I did landscaping for 13 years of my life. And every time we were doing somebody's irrigation system, it was because we were changing it from drip irrigation to sprinklers. And just never had a good story about drip irrigation. Some people like it, some people don't. But me personally, it's never been my favorite. I'm more of a sprinkler or a flooding irrigation purposes. I either will. It is. Me, I like those. A lot of people like the tubes. And that's kind of where most of my conversations go is people have the drip irrigation. Me, I like flood irrigation, but that's because I'm going to come out there every day. And like I said, I do rows. So I'm going to flood my rows every day, keep them moist, keep them wet. Not everybody does that. So a lot of times it's a whole lot easier for them to buy that, turn on the faucet, it drips real slowly. They don't have to worry about it. They don't have to be out there all the time. So if that's not something you're going to be able to do every day, drip irrigation is probably the way to go. If you are, then I would recommend the ones on the bottom, a sprinkler or some form of that. Yes.
For folks that might not be able to water every day,
Mm-hmm.
a trick that I learned when I was over in the East is my drivers like to have a raised garden. And the hose, you had to drag it 400 yards, because the spigot was up against the building. And so what I would do is take a 2-liter soda bottle, either drill or poke a hole in the lid, fill the bottle up, and then you just next to the plant that you're watering, you fill it with water, then just turn it upside down and put it in the ground next to it. And then as the soil dries, it releases the water into it.
Yep.
So you have a constant.
And actually,
You go on vacation or.
Actually, when I was in Hayes County, King's Feed, there's a lady, I can't remember what they're actually called. I have a picture of it. I can find it. But does everybody know what a chimenea looks like? So imagine that, no hole for the firewood or anything, but it comes up and it's got a little top. I bought my father-in-law 2 of these things. And basically it doesn't have any of the seal protector on the outside. So it does the same thing that you're talking about. It actually separates the water and what the root systems grow around that pot. But I bought him those 3 years ago, and it just happened to be that that summer was scorching hot. And so he put 2 of them, buried them into the ground, filled them up with water. And he said it would last about 3 to 4 days during the summer. And he had the best lettuce and peppers that grew all around that. And all he did was fill it up and just kind of let it go for 3 or 4 days. And that same concept, I know they sell them at King's Feed there in Wimberley. And I can't remember what they're called, but it's actually a really cool experiment that we did just to see how they would work. And it's the same concept as what you're talking about.
And that, most of the ranches use flood irrigation, for their hay fields.
Yes.
Ground level water, open the floodgate.
And yeah, and one reason that those are X'd out is because a lot of people don't have the time and they're not going to do it all the time. But another reason is they get overwatered. And that's when we start having root problems, because the roots are consistently sitting in wet water, which is obviously going to kill your roots because they're not getting oxygen. So that's another reason people won't do it. That's why they like the drip irrigation. It's a lot slower. It doesn't keep everything soaking wet. But if you're good about it, you can do either one of these and be fine. So when you came in, you should have gotten one of these sheets. This is a sheet that the horticulturalist up in Travis County created, and she lets us use. Since we're pretty much very close and in the same exact region as Travis County, these are the dates that typically you'd want to start planting for fall or spring gardening, and there's all your list of different vegetables. Like I said, typically starting now, February is when you're going to really start your spring gardening, depending on what you want to plant. But most people are actually going to be starting in the month of March. And that's why we're talking about it now. March is typically, we're getting out of our freezes. We're starting to warm up by that point. February typically is the last of the real hard freezes, I would say, coming in. Where we're going to stay below 32 for a little while. But depending on what you want to plant, and there's a list of plants on that one for y'all. But that kind of gives you an idea. And I wanted to make sure y'all walked away with that sheet as well, so you can look. But we are considered Region 3, if you ever pull up a map. And that goes, the reason we say Region 3 is there's 5 different regions that they break Texas up in. You got Region 1 and then Region 5, and those are the extremes. One's super, super cold, gets a lot, and that's your top of Texas. And the other one's Brownsville, that area where it's nice and warm typically all year. So Region 3 is kind of that middle. And if you're ever looking up how much chill time we get, you're always going to look at Region 3, which average is 700 hours for the winter. This winter, maybe not. It's kind of warm this year for the most part. But here again, it's just the same dates that are on there. The different vegetables, asparagus, beans, snap or bush, pole beans, lima beans. It just kind of tells you after February 1, March, April, March. So it's just a list of all the ones that are on that sheet. I just was putting it out here so that you could actually read it a little better.
What's the website for this?
If you type in exactly what it says on there, vegetable garden planting guide,
Okay.
it's right there through Travis County. But good for all those. But that's kind of a broad aspect. I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions because typically I always have a lot of questions at the end. So do y'all have any questions that I can answer for y'all as far as spring gardens go? We kind of went over your options as far as planting, building a garden. I'd probably say 95% of the people are going to have to build a garden and not have one actually in the ground. They're going to have to build a raised bed of some sort, unless you are the 5% that actually has some deep soil here in the hill country. But and I got the list of plants for y'all to look at so y'all can decide what you want to do. Big thing is knowing how much space you have and making sure you have enough sunlight.
How much water, how often do you recommend you water plants like tomatoes and?
So tomatoes and cucumbers that are pretty much, when you look at them, they're mostly water. They need more water than say peppers or little plants like that. It also depends on your drainage that we talked about. So if you have good drainage, it's going to be probably every day. If you have a lot of drainage, meaning that when you go back out there, if you water, say you water in morning, if by that afternoon you go over there and it feels dry again, probably need to water again. So, and if that's the case, one thing I would recommend there is before you even plant anything, just go out there, water your whole bed, and then kind of start a clock and see how long it takes before it gets dry again. If it takes less than a day, then you might need to add some clay. So you thicken it up a little bit. If it's still pretty good and wet or just slopping, then we might need to add some sand. So we get that drainage. So you're looking for that happy medium, because if you can get the happy medium, you can probably water tomatoes, things like that once a day. The other stuff maybe every other day. But you're looking for that happy medium. That makes sense.
Does your site have any offerings for what is really deer tolerant landscaping planting?
So I'll be honest, the things that say they are deer resistant really aren't.
Yeah, like nothing.
At some point, the deer are going to eat it. Now they may hate it and never come back, but at some point, yes, they will eat it. Because even if they say it's deer resistant, no, deer will still. I've had more stuff pulled up that said it was deer resistant because for some reason the deer in our neighborhood love my front yard. And I can't plant anything in the front yard because every time I do, it's in the middle of the yard pulled up. And I have bought deer resistant plants and they still don't.
No such thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, two things. I've got a 16 by 16 garden. That's the railroad ties I told you. And I had access to kennel panels.
Yes.
Chain link, and they were 6 by 8. It worked beautiful. I could cover. They were tall enough for me to cover when the birds became a problem. But the only thing I got bid on, I had to be careful, is I started to try to use them for a trellis. And with the summers we have here, it just cooked anything that was on the metal.
Yeah.
So if I wanted that, I hadn't done it, but I'd have to run up a wooden trellis in there. I could keep it near it, but not actually have it climb it. The roses do great on the metal.
So I know me, I rented a house one time and I had to build some trellises. What I did is I bought those little 1x1s and I bought just regular, what you would use in concrete wire to staple the concrete and make it strong. And I just stapled it to that, built me 2 little frames, one that could actually have legs so it had a little more support than sticking it straight in the ground. And that's how I grew my cucumbers. And never had a problem, it didn't get hot. It seemed to work out well on the trellises and very inexpensive. I think the whole damn thing cost me $20 and I built 2 or 3 of them.
Excellent. Yeah, I just had access to those panels. I wasn't gonna let that go.
Oh, no.
Because like I said, it kept out the deer also.
Yes.
Do you have any ideas for like combating bugs? 'Cause I know like this last year was our first year trying to go garden. We were struggling with like everything eating our lettuce and eating the broccoli leaves and stuff like that. Is there any like things besides using like chemicals to combat that stuff?
Vinegar and water.
Yeah, vinegar and water. I know in the past few years, grasshoppers have been a huge deal. One day you'll come out there, garden look great. Come out the next morning, all of a sudden everything's eaten and gone. That's how quick the grasshoppers are. So it's kind of hard sometimes to predict it, but natural vinegar and water, or you could get 7 dust, throw 7 dust on the plants. That'll work as well.
What's the mix in vinegar water?
Huh?
What's the mix?
Probably, I want to say quarter to 3/4, 1/4 vinegar, 3/4 water. Somewhere along those lines. It's not a whole lot of vinegar to water.
And thank you so much.
But yeah, 7 dust is another good one. That's just a powder you throw on the plants. After that, it's chemical sprays to resist them. But once you see some kind of bug, just go ahead and if you have the 7 dust, throw it out on all the plants. I said grasshoppers. I've watched my buddy have this issue 2 years in a row. They really love his green beans every year that he grows. He'll go out there one night, pick out a bunch. Next morning, everything's eaten, all gone. And they hit that quick. So you kind of got to be on your A game when it comes to pests. But if you're looking for a natural, yeah, vinegar water or 7 dust. Yes, ma'am.
Explain the difference between compost and mulch.
Yes.
I have a great compost house. I'm gonna have to use it.
So compost is actually just broken down waste material or mulch or anything like that. Mulch can be leaves, it can be actual mulch where you get the chips, like the big mulch pile over here at the recycling plant. But basically compost is just everything broken down. So what you're gonna do is, yeah, that's got it. So what you would do is take all that compost that you have before you plant anything, make a big old layer on top of your garden beds right now and just mix it in. Or if you got some during the season while everything's growing, just come in there and put it on top and kind of water it in. And basically that turns into like a slow release fertilizer. So it's taking all the nutrients that you have in that compost pile and slowly bringing it into the soil as it gets watered every time. So it's not necessarily a quick release like most of your fertilizers are.
So you wouldn't apply and put compost in it for your plant. You wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't do that. No, I would actually just mix it throughout the whole garden bed. So I'd put a big old layer across the whole top and just till it in.
'Cause I have a raised bed.
Yeah. And so you could take it, shovel it, and then take a pick or something and just mix it in there. But that's how I would do it.
What's the address for testing the soil?
So it's we're located at 325 Resource Drive in New Braunfels. And like I said, it's real easy. All you got to do is go dig you a 6-inch hole, pull out some dirt, put it in that bag, you fill out a form, mail it off to College Station with the check. And usually it's about a 2-week turnaround. Usually by the time you get to April, it gets a little bit longer because a lot of people are sending in stuff in April because everybody gets behind on getting everything started. So April, that time period gets a little busy, but typically it's 2 weeks. They send you back an email and it has everything that's in your soil. It'll tell you if it's high or low and what they recommend. And if you get that and you still have questions, you can always call our office and I can walk you through it and kind of help you figure out what's going on with soil, and then we can figure out a fertilizer for you to use as well.
But you're not gonna come out and actually help us dig this.
I mean, I will come out and watch you and cheer you on,
Thank you, sir.
and maybe even put a little spray paint spots for you. Like you need to put that one right there.
I was looking at that picture of you using that flood watering, and I said, I got a canoe, I can mix 2 birds with one stone with this. Thank you so much, I appreciate this.
But
We had an online question about herbs when to plant them and any of the best ones for Texas.
so herbs you're gonna plant when it gets a little warmer. You'll plant those starting March. That'll be some more of your warm season. Obviously, cilantro does really well. Once it hits, typically for me, very first part of August, end of July, that's when everything just shoots up and then that's over. When you get seed heads on cilantro, pretty much that plant's done and it's usually later in the season. But most herbs can be grown year round. You can actually put them in some kind of pot. You can bring them inside when it gets real cold. But herbs, for the most part, if you're going to do it actually in your garden, you'd start in March. But you can plant pretty much anything. Rosemary does well, basil, cilantro, any of those, mint, oregano.
Couple of questions about raised beds. Do you treat insect pests in regular beds? And also, what about if it's maybe a storm event, do you like your soil out of your raised bed?
You shouldn't lose any soil out of your raised beds as long as you built them right. If you didn't build them very good, then you probably will lose some soil. But that's why every year we're adding compost and new dirt to it. Main reason being is we're trying to get some new nutrients in there to begin with. So whether you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy a garden bag of soil, or you do your own composting at home and you're just transferring it into that, no matter what, you will always lose some kind of soil. It's just how much will depend on how well you build those raised beds. As far as the bugs, it's going to be the same. They don't care whether it's in the ground or in a raised bed, the bugs are still going to find your plants. So you're still going to treat them the same. You're going to treat them when you see them. Preventatives work so well, but unless you actually see the bug, then you don't know really when to treat. So you got to keep an eye on that.
For those bugs that get into the stem of like squashes and stuff like that.
So those, when you're actually battling them, the easiest thing to do is to buy a chemical spray to spray them with. Obviously, you're going to lose some of those plants, especially some of the squash where they're actually eating it. But when you see that, just go ahead and spray your whole plant, or you could do vinegar water, 7 dust. Those might not work as well as, say, a chemical spray. But it's something that once you see them, if you can treat it, typically you can get rid of most of the bugs. And then the fruit that is damaged or the vegetables that are damaged, just go ahead and pick them, put them in your compost pile or throw them away, get them away, get them out of there, because obviously those have been infected. We don't want to keep them there. Yeah, generally they'll eat and get inside of those and then eventually move on to the next one. So if you see it, just go ahead and pick it, treat your plant, treat your whole garden, and wait and see what happens.
Those radio shows, I'm going to advertise now, Sunday morning, 9 o'clock, 5:50 on 1200, I forget, it's one of those 2 stations. They have pretty legitimate information on there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, there's
every weekend, and it's a call-in show also.
Yes, there's quite a few of them, but I know they do one here, and that's Master Gardeners that does it, and they ask garden questions, tree questions. For the local one here, 680 does one on the weekends, and I think that one's an hour long. But they do talks. But yeah, there's lots of different talk radio shows where they just talk strictly gardening, and you can get a lot of ideas. I
On the
know.
way home from church, so
Yeah.
I can't miss.
I know my grandpa used to listen to him before he died, and then I know my father-in-law listened to him ever so often too.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Last year, our tomatoes at the end of the season started getting shriveled, their leaves started kind of shriveling, and they had dots on the leaves. Do you have any suggestions for that? Because once one got it, they just went down the line and all the tomato plants got it. They couldn't get rid of them for anything.
I'm trying to think what that would have been. Little dots and shriveled leaves. I'd have to look and see.
When the weather started getting hot and
Yeah, typically if you can make it to August with tomatoes, you're doing very, very good. Tomatoes don't really like severe heat
yeah.
so much. So usually what happens is they start wilting and then they just end up dying. This summer wasn't as terrible as most Texas summers. So we did actually have a lot of people that kept growing their tomatoes through the winter. But that's one that I can look into.
If it had, do you think it could have been something like a spider mite or something like that?
It could have been a number of either funguses or different insects. But because typically, normally I would have said if it was August time period, they probably just died from the heat. But we didn't have that this year, really. It wasn't that hot. It's kind of mild this year.
What type of larger tomato would you recommend? I just can't grow. I got the little ones coming out.
See, I like the Beef Masters myself because they're a big old tomato, and I personally just like cutting up a tomato, salt, pepper, and calling that lunch. And so Beef Master is real big, it's real red and juicy, and that's my favorite one. But every year, San Antonio Stock Show does a tomato trial, and they come out with a brand new tomato every year at the rodeo. And so I don't remember what this one's year is. I haven't looked it up yet, but that's also another one to look at because typically they come out with some really, really good tomatoes. The San Antonio Stock Show and Rodeo. They have one every year. It's a new one every year that they come out with.
Just when you thought you were catching up.
And I believe it's the master gardeners there in Bear County that are the ones doing that every year.
Nothing to do with vegetation, plant life or anything, but I heard on the radio this morning that this weekend New Brunswick's having an antique show.
Huh. Okay. I was gonna say I'll be in Atlanta. I gotta go to stock show this weekend. We start stock show season this weekend through the end of March.
There's worse things you can get stuck doing.
There is. I mean, they gotta send me to Fort Worth, so.
I just came from there. So.
All right. Any other questions that I can help you with?
I just have a question for you. You said you have a mill, a sawmill. Sawmill, where is it? Up in Blanco? And do you sell the, you do custom sawmilling? If you have wood you want removed somewhere and sawed down to something in particular, or you just want the tree or log removed, we can do that. If you have a need, one, or desire for a particular hardwood, softwood, size, scope, we can try to find it for you. And for instance, wood to build raised bed. Since lumber is so ridiculous right now.
Mhm.
You
What's the
know,
name of your sawmill?
Lost Creek Sawmill. Our website hasn't gone public yet, but we have a Facebook page.
And that's Michael, right?
Yeah, the telephone poles are really good for ranch products, you know, hose, fencing. We're building a drying kiln for firewood and that sort of stuff, so.
I'm really thinking about a raised bed and I'm gonna do any vegetable gardening, I have flowers all over the place, but it just seems so much easier. And I just can't see doing cinder blocks. I mean, that's, I don't know.
I mean, the center blocks do work. I see it every time I go to my father-in-law's because he shows me his garden every time we go over there. But the center blocks do work. I know he did his too high and then he put a flat stone on top so he could sit down on it. But like I said, he's a little bit shorter. And so every once in a while he'll grow some tomatoes. And what he actually ended up doing was he got mineral tubs instead. Now he grows his tomatoes in those because they're shorter. Because before I'd go over there and be like, hey, I need you to go out to the garden and pick the top ones. And so I'd have to go out there and pick all the top tomatoes off for him.
So simplest way to do a raised bed is if you take either the steel or wooden cement post stakes, you know, for doing concrete form. And Sam, would you put one on, you know, so they're facing each other with a gap between them. And you can stack like Lowe's and Home Depot have 2x3s for $1.25 each. You know, they're 2x3x8, and stack 4 or 5 of them, and you know, you can go as high as you want.
Absolutely.
That's easy to disassemble if you ever need to do that too.
We fortunately just had a new back porch put in. Our backyard, the back door is about 50 feet off of the lawn surface, you know, it's way up in the air, so she had a new larger porch put in, and we had the contractor leave the lumber from the old wooden porch there in the yard, so she has plenty to build. We just need to get it done.
And I will say, if you don't have a very big garden, or say you just have one garden bed, I would really look into that intensive gardening, like I said, where you're using every square inch that you possibly can, because it really does, it does work. You can produce a lot more than you would if you did rows. So if you're limited on space, definitely look into that. I have seen it work. Like I said, that lady's yard, I've never seen anything like it. I don't know how she gets away with it in the city of San Marcos, but every inch was nothing but plants. Some kind of vegetable, some kind of fruit, some kind of fruit tree. From the sidewalk in front of her house to the front of her house, the backyard to the back fence.
It sounds to me like she has neighbors that never have to buy fresh vegetables.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It also sounds like she has neighbors that'll never be able to sell their house because of what's next to them.
My neighbor across the street, he just came over a couple of days ago with a laundry basket full of carrots. He said that they're just growing like crazy. He didn't know what to do with the excess.
But it is 1 o'clock, and if you have any other questions, feel free to ask, but that is the program for today.
Will the kale or those kinds of things come out with that?
A little bit, but we're kind of getting towards the end, where now would be the time that you're taking everything out from the winter and getting ready for the spring.
He has a podcast called Clear.
Did you know that,
Yeah, no, we just
I
listened to
heard
it.
lettuce
It
going
sounds so much like it. I had to keep looking
I did
at
not know that.
So you don't recognize me with the
I
hat.
haven't eaten lettuce in years.
See, it sounds so much like.
I'll say iguana lizards aren't one I typically deal with. So I've never heard of that.
To me, that's pretty surprising, you know, because that's one of the most common lettuces there are, and it's the cheapest.
Right.
But you know, if we'll kill a lizard, I don't think it can't be that healthy.
Yeah, if it'll kill a lizard.
You're